Hello everybody, and welcome to part 3 of our little series on doing a braided steel handle. Well, I said this being the last part, if you have not seen the original simple poker, you're going to need to watch that video to finish up this project. But what we're going to focus on in the third part is going to be the finial for the handle. Now, of course, the handle is very attractive in itself, but we're really going to top it off with a bull's head. Now, a lot of you have seen these forged handles a lot of places, and there's a couple of gurus out there that do nothing but these handles. They do storks and wolves and bears, pretty fancy stuff. Jay even did a few of them, and Jay's favorites were pretty much limited to bulls and rams, but he had one that he really adored, which was a unicorn. But today we're going to start with something very simple, and we're going to do the bull's head. Now, there are a couple of tools that you're going to need to be able to do this project effectively. We need to take a look at those first because you need to have them on hand and ready. This is going to require a lot of handwork with chisels and things of that nature and punches. So once again, this is a very complex project. It's very easy to mess up, so don't be afraid to start over. You're going to need some 1/2-inch stock, square stock. I would suggest a 2-foot piece will be more than enough. Just make sure that you have something to get a good grip. And you're not going to need a welding fire or anything like that. But let's take a look at the tools that we're going to need for this particular project. All right, guys, let's take a quick glance at what we're going to be doing here. Of course, this is our handle from our last video, which is still looking real good. But in order to be able to do the bull's head effectively, you're basically going to need 3 modified punches, or 2 modified punches and a chisel. The first chisel you want here is going to be a hot chisel. Now, the way that you tell a hot chisel from a cold chisel is basically the bevel right here. Now, when using these tools, it is absolutely critical that you have a glass of water nearby because the tools need to be kept cool. The blade is so thin it's going to heat up very quick, and even if this is mild steel, it will resist going into the metal very well as long as you keep it cool. Now, your punches are basically 2 modified center punches. Now, the first one is a center punch, but the tip has been ground with a little more of a steep angle. This is used for actually making the nostrils and things of that nature, while this one has a much more rounded and it has a blunt tip on the end. I use this as an eye punch. Now, Jay had an eye punch that actually had a small piece divot cut out of the middle, which was very cool, but we're going to make do with this one. That's going to be a talk for a later day. So basically 4 things that you need: 2 modified punches of some sort, a hot slitting chisel, and a cup of water. Absolutely necessary. Now, once you have those things, you got your bar of 1/2-inch steel, and you're going to be ready to start forging out the basics of the bull's head. Of course, we take our first heat, and we go ahead and we start working it down, just like I told you. Now, notice it's starting to flatten out, but I want to maintain this dimension. So basically, you want a one-sided taper. Now, 1/2-inch is never really an easy thing to work with, so as you see, my anvil's wanting to shift a little bit on this concrete. But I'm going to take another heat, and then we're going to go back and finish out that taper. And like I said, don't be afraid to get it down thin. Now that we've taken our second heat, got a good heat on it this time, and here we go. Alright, and there we have it. Basically what we have a one-sided taper. It's nice and gradual, and once again, this dimension here is maintained as well as possible. Now what's going to happen is we're going to have to cool this down, and one of 2 things is going to occur. Either you're going to take a chisel and slit this up the middle, or you can use your bandsaw or hacksaw. I highly recommend for something this fine using a hacksaw or a bandsaw because the cut is much cleaner and a lot easier to do. Now, the trick to doing a good clean cut is making sure that you have a good, accurate guideline to follow. So, mark it out first with soapstone or a Sharpie pen, and then do all your cutting. So, we're going to do that right now. Now, once again, whether you're going to be using a chisel or anything else, a good layout line is critical to a good cut. That was it was a very difficult thing for me to understand, that you just don't jump in there with a chisel or even a saw and cut a straight line. You have to mark it out. You have to have guidelines. And you see that the toolbox I have here in my apron includes Sharpie pens, even some soapstone, all kind of good stuff. So make sure, even if it's a situation where you reach in your pocket and pull out a tape measure and say, okay, half of a half inch is a quarter of an inch, and you mark it all the way down using that, it's a good idea. It gives you a guideline to go, because what you don't want is you don't want to have one lopsided horn. You know, it's not professional looking. So make sure, mark your guidelines very clearly, and then very carefully go along sawing them. Now, even if you're going to chisel this, I recommend, at least for folks just starting, cool the metal off, draw your mark outline with a Sharpie, and take your chisel, and while it's cold, chisel in a small line that can be seen after you heat it up. It will save you a lot of time and a lot of aggravation, and make, like I said, just make everything look a lot better. So I'm going to take the L saw blade method of cutting this, and I'll be right back, and we'll be ready to actually start forming and folding the head. And voila, as you can see, this bad boy has now been slit, and I recommend about 2.5 inches. However, this is going to be one of those things you're simply going to have to play with and get used to. Slitting this with the bandsaw reminds me of a really interesting story that you guys should know. When I first started learning from Jay, and I may have told this already, but I'm going to tell it again. Jay made these forks, these barbecue forks, and the split that he had was absolutely phenomenal. And I tried for months to replicate it with the chisel. And finally, after as months, I said, Mr. Riekert, I said, I can't do it. I said, I have tried and I tried. Would you show me your technique with the chisel for splitting those forks to make them so nice and neat? And he got over the anvil and acted like he was reaching for a tool, but then he walked into his shop and turned on the bandsaw and said, "Mink." It was probably the only time in my life that I ever cussed Jay Riekert. So that's the situation there. Bandsaw is a very handy tool, even a hacksaw, very handy for making a clean, nice cut. Now, what we're going to need to do here is we're going to put these back into the fire, and we're going to hammer them and forge them out the way that we want them. Now, this is really going to be critical, because this is going to be the last time that we have to really forge on these horns. Everything else is going to be bending them into place. So get them the way that you want them. Get them thin enough that you can move them while they're hot with a pair of pliers. You can see that the cut, even though it goes all the way down to here, is still very thick. I'd have a dickens of a time trying to move that with a pair of pliers. So we're going to be we're going to thin it just a little bit so it's much easier to work with. So enough talking. Let's go back to the fire and get these bad boys heated up. Get to kind of laugh here. I'm in the shop with all the guys today, so some boys get to come by and look while I'm on camera. So what we're going to do, guys, is once you've got the split, and just like you're working a fork, you're going to split the tines. I mean, up until this point, it's going to be just like doing a fork. Break the tines out. And thin them down. Now, if you remember that when we've done forks before, I've always said, if you're using a coal fire especially, be careful, because those tines are very small, and yes, they will burn off. So, if you're using a coal forge, watch yourself. Let's take another heat, and we'll form that other side of the horn. Okay, guys, we got a good heat on this side here. And once again, if you've made a good clean cut, you shouldn't have a lot of work to do here. You just want to pay attention to this area here, because that's usually going to be the toughest area to move around. Now, when you get them set out, go ahead and make your T. Try to make them as even as possible, because now what we're going to do is we're going to start heating this area, and we're actually going to start bending this into the head. And there's a couple ways to do this. One of the quickest ways here is choose a point about an inch, inch and a quarter down, and with a heavier hammer, use the corner of the anvil to do like you would actually a cutoff. But you don't want to go all the way through. You only want to go about halfway, if that, till it does this number, because that's going to be your fold line. You'll heat this guy up and then actually fold it over so this entire piece is going to fold back onto itself, like you were preparing for what's called a faggot weld. And that's no joke, that's what it's called. A faggot weld is where you take the end of a bar and fold it back over onto itself. So that's where you need to be. So let's take one more heat and let's do that. Once again, we've got a good heat. Now what you want to do is you want to turn that cut up, and then you want to bend the top of the head down over the corner of the anvil, just like this. And fold it over right there. Now clean up the edges so you have everything in line, as you can see, just like that. Only other thing you might want to do is come in with the front end of the hammer here, because it's going to be pretty distorted. Now that's really not a heavy hammer job. When you're doing that kind of work, you want something light, something that will move fast. And you just want to clean up his snout. Okay, and there you can see is the first makings of that bad boy coming out. Now what you want to do is you can do most of your work right here as far as the chiseling, all that kind of comes in. And you're going to have a couple places that you're going to attack first. The three things you're going to have to do for the face of this guy are going to be the mouth, which is down here, the nose, which is on top, and then actually the eyes, which are on the side here and here. I'll tell you what, why don't I get a close-up on that so you can actually see what I'm doing. I think that'll be in everybody's interest. Okay, here we go. Much better. Now what we're going to see, once again, as I was saying, the mouth will be on the underside of this guy, which will be right across here. The nostrils are going to be on the top, and the chisel will actually come in from this side and push the nostril up, and then you have your eyes on the side. Now, Jay used to actually come in and drop a couple of welds here on the side, just keep them coming apart. You can do that as well. You can actually forge weld it if you're very careful, but understand that it's going to be for decoration, so cut yourself some slack, especially if this is going to be your first time doing it. Now, of course, to do this properly, you're going to need to put this in a vise, except for the eyeballs. So that's why I usually start with the eyeballs first, and I do them on the anvil. You'll actually lay it here, come down with the eye punch, and actually punch in the eyes, because this has to be done on the opposite side. With the nostrils and the mouth, it has to be locked into the vise because the force is going to be moving across here. So let's start with the eyes. That right there. Good to go. Now this is a great place to have a third hand or somebody helping you. And what you want to do is you want to go in right here on top. And pull the eye. Now let me show you what that's looking like. If you can see that, you can see the eyes actually being pushed here, and you need to do it while it's hot, so we're not going to waste any time. We're going to go to the other side, and I'm going to do the other side. Now if you put your punch right on the edge, you can actually make that top swell up a little bit, and it gives it a lot more definition. So you're actually aiming for it to fall off the edge. So let me reset the camera so you can actually see what that's going to look like. Alright, as you can see, where we've gone into here, we've actually pushed the metal up, so it gives it kind of that little rounded surface here, and that's what you want to shoot for. So, and you can play with that by actually handling the chisel to the top when you're hammering it. There's a lot that can be done here, but for right now, we got ourselves a good eyeball. Now we need to do basically the same thing for the nostrils and cut the mouth, but since we don't have an anvil on the opposite side of where we're doing, we're actually going to need to go to a vise to hold everything into place, and of course we're going to need another heat for that. And once you get a good heat, of course you want to come into the vise pretty much just like this. Get it as close to your piece as you can because you need the support. Make sure to have your water jar close at hand. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here with the nostrils, and this works basically the same way that the eyeballs did, except you're pushing against the anvil. You can see how that works there. And Once again, I'm making sure to keep the punch cool. Now you can go just as wild as you want to with that, but I'm going to slip up very quickly. You can see that this piece wants to move a little bit in the vise, so don't be afraid to really tighten down on it. I'm going to push it up just one more time. Hopefully it's going to stay where it needs to stay before I lose heat. And now I'm going to come in with the chisel and actually start opening up the mouth. Now normally when you're opening up the mouth, it's going to be a more than one heat process, because if you really want to get it open and make it look nice, it's going to take, usually for me, I take 3 heats to do this. But work the chisel left to right, just don't go in all the way flat, and it always helps if you use a lighter hammer. This is not a heavy hammer job. And make sure that you keep your chisel very cool. Doing this kind of chisel work with a fine chisel takes time, so don't get greedy. If it starts cooling off and it's not moving like you want it to, take a break, cool the chisel, and go back to the fire. But notice how I'm moving left to right to open everything up. So what I'm going to do now is go back into the fire, take one more heat, and then that should open up the mouth like I want it to be opened. So once more into the fire, and then we'll set him up and fix his horns. Now one of the things that I do want to stress is that you see that we keep going back to the fire to take a whole heat on the entire head. If you have an acetylene torch, it makes this job very easy. So instead of having to go back to the fire, you can lock it in the vise once and be ready to go for whatever you need it to do. So just bear in mind that when you start doing this detail work, yes, it's fun to do it the old way, but a few modern tools can go a long way into helping this project go much faster. We have another good heat, so I lock this guy in the vise, take a good grip on him, and we're going to come in for what looks like it's going to be our final cut here. So once again, I angle my chisel and I work it all the way around. And whether you have a bull with a smirk or you have him open wide screaming is up to you, of course. Just depends on what you're looking for. So, but I promise you, you'll get a much more attractive product if you'll actually tilt that chisel left to right. It'll look good. Okay. So, chisel's cooled. And what we have here is we have our little bull's head been chiseled out. We have a mouth, we have a nostril, and we have eyeballs. Now, this would be a good time to kind of break a lot of these square edges if you want to. You can come in with the hammer and just ding it up a little bit, especially if you've got a ball peen hammer, just to kind of make it look more forged. Maybe work on the nose a little bit. Like I said, this is really just a basic little deal. So I'm going to play with it a little bit. And then the only thing we need to do after that is actually bend the crook. And I'll show you how to use a post vise for that very, very easily. Now for this heat, what you guys want to do is you want to heat up about 3 inches behind the head of the bull. Now what we're going to do now is we're actually going to make it curl so that it can be used as a finial topper. Now one of the neat things is that this post vise, and most post vices have a very unique shape right here, and that's actually exactly what you need for the bending. Now this post vise is a little small as far as going left to right, so I'm not sure if I have enough overhang to really bring it all the way around that I want to. But you'll see the effect. If you have a larger post vise, you'll immediately see how to do this. What you want to do is you want to take your animal head and you want to catch it right over the top of the horns, but as far to the side as you can. Actually, I'm going to go take that back a little under the horns, and then you simply pull down. But to do this right, you need to have some hammer assistance, because what you're trying to do is bring this piece down and around the top of that vise. Now this can be done over the horn of the anvil. You get the idea. So now what we're going to do, we're going to take it out, we're going to straighten it, but you can see that the animal head has now been turned up this way, which is very good. And then we're going to put one other kink right here to straighten her out. So I'll go to the anvil, straighten her just a little bit, and we go from there. Alright guys, pretty much going to be one of your last heats. You've got the first crook right there, and you can do this in the vise, you can do it in a bending tool. What you want to do is just simply lay it over the horn, and you want to kink it back just a little bit. The degree of that bend is up to you, but you can see that now it forms a nice little hook which can be cut here and attached to whatever. Now Jay used to actually come in here before he did all this. He'd hammer texture it and actually put a couple of fullers in there. But once again, we're going to try to keep this very basic. So intents and purposes, we are done with our piece. I'm going to kink it just a little bit more. I just like a sharp angle right there. This looks better to me. And the last thing that we're going to do before we come in and clean this up is actually set the horn. So we're going to take one heat and then simply take a pair of scrolling pliers or a pair of pliers, period, and turn the horns up and then forward. And we're going to have our very own bull-headed poker top. So let's take one more heat and we will finish up. Alright guys, here we are. And I'm going to bring this right out of the fire, and you can see we have the head here, and I have a pair of lineman's pliers. And all I want to do is I want to go about halfway, turn one side up, do the same thing with the other side. Now this is the part where I was telling you that if you get it too thick, it's going to be a pain in the butt. I'm going to turn them up, and then I'm going to turn it forward. Got some high horns. This is like a 14-point cow. And then it just becomes a matter of adjusting and making everything look right. Jay did his long, I like to do mine high, and you can see what we end up with. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to straighten this thing up, and then I'm going to hit it with a wire brush while it's still hot. In fact, I'm going to do that right now for the initial brush. Just remove a lot of the scale. And then we're going to cold brush it to really bring it out. And then we're all going to have a look on our bullhead top. Okay folks, let's take a look at what we've got. And you can see here is our bullhead poker top. Now you can see it has nostrils, it has a little mouth there, and of course one eyeball on the side. Now this is not a fancy topper as they go. This is very basic. You can see that a lot of the lines haven't been broken. It really hadn't been forged a lot. The head is still very square. But that's okay. For a first-timer in a basic project, this is a great way to start and a great way to start building on different pieces. So there you go. That is going to be the bull's head poker. Now guys, I had originally meant for this to be the third and last part of the series. But we've kind of gone way over time, so you're going to reap the benefit of such things, and we're going to do a part 4. And part 4 is where we're actually going to forge and assemble everything so you can see how it's done. So, like I said, it's a freebie for everybody. So guys, here we are so far. We have made our handle, which is nice and knotted, and we have now made our finial. The only thing that lacks now is the poker itself, which is of course very simple, and the assembly. And what I'm going to focus on in the next video is showing you how to go in and use modern tools like the MIG and the grinder to smooth everything out, and then how to hide it using your forged fire and your hammer. So, until next time guys, I will see you next week.